We're starting this tutorial with an empty After Effects project because there are some important settings to understand when importing layered Photoshop and layered Illustrator files. We will be importing a layered Illustrator file, but the process will be exactly the same for importing a layered Photoshop file. Let's double click in the empty space of the property panel to open the import file dialog. Go ahead and navigate to the assets folder, which is saved right next to your project files in the work with compositions folder. If you don't have these files, you can feel free to follow along. With your own layered Photoshop or layered Illustrator files. Once you are in the Assets folder, click once on the I'll Preserve Illustrators file. And then go down to the Import as option and click on the drop-down menu. Choose Composition, Retain Layer Size. I will explain what that means in a second, but for now, with that option selected, go ahead and click the Import button to import a file and automatically create a composition. If we look in the project panel with the composition selected, the duration is 0 to 10 seconds. After Effects, we'll choose the duration based on the last composition you created. So, your composition settings may not be the same as mine. If you ever need to change your composition settings, just remember, you can select the composition in the Projects panel and then press Ctrl-K on Windows or Command-K on the Mac to open the composition settings. Then you can change the duration and click OK. I'm going to leave mine set as 10 seconds. So let's double click on the composition in the project panel to open the timeline and preview the composition panel. If we look in the timeline, you will notice that there are many layers that make up this setting. I'm going to hover over the top of the timeline until I get the double arrow and drag up until I see all 9 layers that make the composition. Now let's create a very straightforward animation. I want the owl to fade into the scene and then the text to fade underneath of it. Let's hover over the text in the composition panel and click once. And you notice when that layer is selected, I have control handles that are right around the edge of the layer. The handles only stay close like this. When you choose to retain layer size option on import, without that option, the layer handles for every layer will automatically be the same as the edge of the composition, which can sometimes make the animation quite challenging. Now, with my text layer selected, which is layer 8, let's click on that and drag it to the top of the layer hierarchy in the timeline. Since all the text is on one layer, it's going to be very straightforward to create animation with this layer. Press T to open opacity settings. Now we will animate this in a quick second. I want to animate the appearance of the owl all at once. If you notice, there are many different layers that make up this owl. So if you're not sure what part of the owl layer contains, you can go ahead and toggle the layer visibility off and on. Now, rather than adding keyframes for all these layers, let's go ahead and duplicate the green layer and fade that over top of the owl. So go down to the bottom of the timeline, select layer 9. Press Ctrl D on Windows or Command D on the Mac. Duplicate the layer, click on the new duplicate layer and drag it up just below our top layer, so now it inhabits layer 2. Press T, open the opacity setting for that layer. Since the current time indicator is already at frame 0, all I have to do is click on the stopwatch for the opacity. Now I will set my first keyframe. I will move my current time indicator down to 1 second at a timeline. And then I will change the opacity setting from 100% to 0%. And you'll notice if we scrub the current time indicator, it appears as though the owl is fading into the scene, when in fact we are actually just fading out. The green layer that's above it, use the navigational arrow to position yourself on the second keyframe. Let's trim the start of the owl preserve layer by hovering over the left edge and clicking and dragging. Just make sure to hold Shift after you start to drag. And that will snap the endpoint to the current time indicator, since we want the words to fade in. Let's change the opacity setting from 100% to 0%. And then click on the stopwatch to create our first keyframe. To move the 1 second down the timeline, let's click on the time indicator and then type 100. Then press enter. Now the current time indicator is 1 second further down the timeline. Let's change the opacity setting up to 100%. Now we have a second keyframe, which of course creates the animation. I will move my current time indicator back to the beginning of the timeline and press the spacebar to preview the animation. Now creating your layer graphics in Illustrator or Photoshop can often speed up your motion graphics workflow.